let's continue that discussion with a class devoted to music after 1920. Concert music, art music since 1920 in the United States, in America. To begin, let's listen to some music by one of my favorite composers, a woman by the name of Ellen Taaffe Zwilich. Her name is on the board. She's still alive. She was born in 1939. Here are two excerpts from Zwilich's Concerto Grosso, 1985. Okay. Here's the first. Okay, that's the first excerpt. Here's the second. From the same work. Wow. That was written in 1985. Listen to it again. This is number one. I can believe that excerpt was written in the 20th century, right? I can believe that. But this one. What does that sound like? Yeah, which makes you think of what period from the past? Harpsichord? Because remember, the classical period, during the classical period, the harpsichord was replaced by what instrument? The piano. Right, so don't we need to go a little further back?
That what it was called. It was called the
Baroque period. Right?
Because you were Baroque.
And that's...
People were Baroque back then.
What?
That's why I remembered it, like, the Baroque period, because people were Baroque back then.
Is that a dad joke?
No, that's the way I remember it.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. If it's not Baroque, don't fix it.
That's what
Okay. You remember that's when composers wrote Concerto Grossi, right? And that happens to be the title of this piece of Zwilich's we just listened to. Concerto Grosso 1985. So what's going on here? 20th century composer, late 20th century at that, writing a piece of music called Concerto Grosso, okay, which references a kind of music that was written in the Baroque period, hundreds of years before. And it even kind of sounds like music from that period. What's happened? What's going on there? Anybody want to take a stab?
the United States wasn't as updated with their musical.
In 1985? Wasn't that long ago. What now?
Maybe they're trying to keep like a music alive.
Okay. But the point is, the point that both of you are trying to make is the composer, Ellen Zwilich, is definitely looking backward. She's looking back to older music, right? And this looking back was part of a thread, a movement in concert music in the 20th century called neoclassicism. It wouldn't be a mistake, you wouldn't be wrong to refer to Ellen Taaffe Zwilich as a neoclassicist, a neoclassic composer, or a composer of neoclassical music. Now, Oscar said that, or suggested, that she was looking backward to the classical period. And that may be because of the term next to her name, right? So you could be forgiven for thinking, okay, well, she's looking back to the 18th century, she's looking back to the classical period, Mozart, and so on. But the truth is, she's actually looking back to Georg Friedrich Handel. Remember him? Handel, the one who wrote The Messiah, that oratorio, water music for King George. He also wrote Concerto Grossi, right? And so she's sort of modeling, using Handel as a model for this composition of hers. So why do they attach the term or the label neoclassical to music like this? You know, if they're not looking back specifically to the classical period, why do they say neoclassical? Anybody?
Something like classic.
Say that one more time.
I'm just looking at the word. Is maybe the new type of classic music?
I didn't think of that. There may be something to that. There might be something to that idea. But the reason it's called that is because there's an emphasis on so-called absolute music, right? Does anybody remember what that is? Yeah.
It's just music. It's music only for song, just music, not anything like no other kinds of ideas or any sort of. It's just about music stuff, not about any ideas.
Right. It's not about anything, right? With absolute music, you're not going to find titles like A Wild Rose or Death and Transfiguration or Autumn, right? Absolute music is not going to have titles like that. Descriptive, imaginative titles, because it's not about anything. In contrast to what kind of music? There's absolute music, and then there's what? Starts with a P. Program music. Absolute music, program music. Program music is about something. Something extra musical, something that doesn't have anything to do with music at all, right? Because the music is supposed to evoke feelings associated or thoughts or imaginations associated with this extra musical idea. Edward McDowell's piano piece, A Wild Rose. You know, you read that title, you hear this beautiful piece, and you're supposed to think about a wild rose. Any feelings or associations you have with wild roses. With absolute music, not so much. Absolute music is music for music's sake. It's a kind of formalism, right? Where you appreciate the music entirely for its form, entirely for the way the music is put together. Okay? That's absolute music. It's music that doesn't have any extra musical meaning. You enjoy it simply by appreciating its formal structure and, you know, its technical sort of construction, the way it's put together. Any questions about that? All right. I've mentioned this before, but the reason most of the emphasis in classes like this is on European classical music, European concert music, and emphasis is less so on art music in the United States, is because up until 1920, no one in America really did anything that noteworthy. No one in the United States did anything that remarkable. After 1920, beginning around 1920, concert music in America took off, advanced a great deal, starting around 1920. And it's because, well, you know, we had the First World War, 1914 to 1918, And as a result of that, we had a lot of prominent musicians fleeing Europe. They left Europe to come over here. And even though the United States did participate in World War I, we fought in World War I, the land itself, the infrastructure, the cities, the United States came out of the war pretty much unscathed. Not so much for Europe, right? And then around 1920, we saw the development of agencies like the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA. And they have done a lot since their founding to promote the arts. And they got started in the early 20th century. Also, by the time 1920 rolled around, or starting around 1920, we find that the quality of music education in the United States greatly improved. The quality, the standard of music training, musicianship in the United States really, really improved. Got a lot better. And so for all these reasons, it's kind of around 1920. We can use 1920 as a landmark year for when the whole world of concert music, art music, completely turned around in the United States. And remember, a few classes ago, we were still talking about the Romantic period in the 19th century. Toward the end of that whole section, we talked about European nationalism. Different nations in Europe that experienced a movement of nationalism, a surge of nationalism that was expressed in a lot of different ways, in all the arts, including music. You may also remember that I said that while there was a nationalist movement in the arts in the United States, that didn't happen until much later, right? Remember? So we didn't talk about American nationalism that day, okay? Because even though the United States did have a nationalist movement, it didn't really begin until after 1920. Not in the 19th century, okay, but after we were well into the 20th century. In fact, nationalism in the United States flourished from 1930 till about 1955, so about 25 years. And when you talk about American nationalism, you have to, well, there are a number of composers that could come to mind. But one composer who should definitely come to mind is Aaron Copland. In any discussion of American nationalism in the arts that flourished from 1930 to 1955, one composer that should definitely come to mind is Aaron Copland. He lived from 1900 to 1990. I remember the day he died. I was 17, I think. Sitting in my room, I was listening to NPR and some news program. Can't remember what it's called. Does anybody remember? No. The National Public Radio, they had like this news program. That's it. All Things Considered was on, and they had a story about how he had died earlier that day. He wrote things like Fanfare for the Common Man, which you may have heard. He wrote the music for a ballet called Appalachian Spring. We're going to listen to a bit of that here in just a moment. There was a really awesome choreographer by the name of Martha Graham. She was a dancer, choreographer, ballet teacher, and she came up with this scenario for a ballet. Supposed to be set in the early days of the United States. and she wanted Copeland to write the music for it. In this ballet music for Appalachian Spring, Copeland used an old Shaker hymn called "Simple Gifts." Do you remember that? We listened to Aaron Copeland's arrangement of that hymn, as sung by a tenor, baritone, a male singer in any case. Do y'all remember that? Anybody remember that? Yeah. Well, he uses that same hymn, that same tune, in Appalachian Spring. Like I said, it's a Shaker hymn. Does anybody know who the Shakers were?
It's a sect of Christianity, or like the name Shaker comes from how they would on their feet, and then while worship they would shake.
Yeah.
Because they would be very much into the worship. And
Right. We see something like that to this day, like in certain charismatic churches. They can get pretty physical, right? In their pretty ecstatic in their expression of their faith. And the Shakers were kind of like that. They were originally known as the United Society for Believers in the Second Coming of Christ, or Christ's Second Appearing. And they came over from England in the 18th century and were established here in the United States around, in the 1780s. Okay? And they had their own hymns, and one of those hymns was called Simple Gifts. Aaron Copeland took that melody, incorporated it into Appalachian Spring. All right, let's listen to some of that. Oh, this is the section of Appalachian Spring where he takes that melody and composes a set of variations on that. Here's the Simple Gifts melody, which you can't hear it right away. Simple Gifts melody. Variation 1. Which we know on bassoon. Cool. All right, another movement in concert music that began after 1920. In the 1960s, actually, is a style of music called minimalism. Again, we're talking about American music, American concert music. Okay. And the big names here are Philip Glass. He's written the music for a lot of movies. Has anybody ever seen The Truman Show with Jim Carrey? I think his music is featured in that film. Steve Reich, it's a big name. And you see these dates. It says B for born in 1939, born in 1937, born in 1936. It means they're still alive, right? They're not dead yet. John Adams, for example, he is, if I'm not mistaken, the most performed living composer. And he's held that title for quite a while. And he was born in 1947. Anyway, these guys, the work, the creative products of composers like Glass, Reich, and Adams are collectively known as minimal. Not because, well, somebody take a stab at it. I mean, why would you refer to a work of art, music, whatever it happened to be, whatever the medium? Why might you refer to it as minimal, minimalistic?
It'd be like good background music if there's not too much going on.
Okay, I like that. That response makes me think of a composer by the name of Brian Eno. I would definitely refer to the music, and he's helped Coldplay out on a lot of their stuff. But I would definitely refer to Brian Eno's music as minimalistic, because he uses just as few ideas, musical ideas, as he possibly can. In fact, he himself describes his work as musical wallpaper. Right. I mean, as far as he's concerned, it's definitely meant for the background, right? Anybody else? Yeah.
I guess he'll use like very few instruments, like just like one, or like one sort of. I guess it's just very much one sort of idea, one idea over and over, or very softly.
Okay, well, you brought up another characteristic of minimalism, and that's repetition. Okay, massive repetition. So not only do you have as few musical ideas as possible, but they get repeated over and over and over and over and over and over again. With minimal change. Change does occur, but it occurs minimally, gradually over time. Okay? All right, let's listen to John Adams. Now, he hates, I'm just going to tell you, John Adams hates the minimalist label. Okay, he does not want people to think of his music as, an example of minimalism. He doesn't want to be associated with minimalism. And yet, his music nonetheless contains all these markers, right? Just a very few musical ideas. They get repeated over and over and over again with minimal change, right? This gradual change that occurs over time. And you'll hear that in this piece by Adams called Short Ride in a Fast Machine. See what I mean? from the movie The Matrix. Keanu Reeves, anybody know what I'm talking about? Came out in 1999, so you may not have seen it. Okay, all right, so that concludes everything in this class devoted to concert music, classical music, art music, whatever you want to call it. We've covered a lot of ground. 6th century BC to the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, Baroque, classical, Romantic, 20th century in both Europe and the United States.